"You are dead when we get home." The words were spoken softly, almost casually, but they carried enough weight to make Emily Carter's fingers go still around the glass in her hand. The grand hall of Silverpine Manor was filled with music, warm candlelight, and the quiet conversations of powerful wolves from across the Northern Territories. Yet in that single moment, Emily heard nothing except the echo of those words. Derek Whitmore, the man the world believed was her perfect match, leaned closer with a cold expression before turning away as if she had become invisible. Emily lowered her gaze, hiding the ache behind her eyes. She had learned long ago that surviving among wolves who valued strength above kindness meant making herself smaller. She was an omega in a world that celebrated alphas. She was the healer who could calm frightened hearts and ease suffering. Yet everyone called her gifts insignificant, because they could not be measured by claws, rank, or power. Around her, laughter continued. No one noticed the way her shoulders tensed. No one noticed the way she quietly stepped back from the crowd, trying to disappear before anyone saw how much those words had hurt. But someone did notice. Sitting beside her at the long wooden table was a stranger dressed in a simple black coat. He had spoken very little throughout the evening. Most guests ignored him, assuming he was only another quiet visitor among nobles and warriors. But his silver-gray eyes had never left the room. He had seen Derek's expression. He had heard every word. And he had noticed something no one else had. Emily Carter, the omega everyone overlooked, had spent the entire night making sure everyone else was comfortable. She thanked the servants. She helped an elderly guest find a seat. She comforted a young wolf who was nervous about his first royal gathering. Even after being treated with coldness, she still chose kindness. The stranger watched her walk away from the table, carrying her sadness with quiet dignity. "You should not have to apologize for existing," he whispered under his breath. Emily paused for a moment, unaware of who had spoken. She looked back, but the stranger had already turned toward the crowd. The night continued, but something had changed. The man sitting beside her was not just another guest. He was Adrian Blackthorne, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, a ruler known for his careful judgment and his refusal to ignore injustice. He had come to Silverpine Manor searching for answers about the behavior of certain packs. He expected to find arrogance, ambition, and deception. He never expected to find a woman who had every reason to become bitter, yet still carried compassion like a light in the darkness. Emily believed nobody had seen her pain. She believed nobody cared. But the most powerful alpha in the land had been sitting beside her the entire time. And before the night ended, he would discover that the omega everyone dismissed was the one person in the room who truly understood what strength meant. Emily Carter had spent years learning how to disappear. Not because she wanted to be forgotten, but because being noticed had always come with a price. In Silverpine Pack, an omega was expected to be gentle, obedient, and grateful for whatever place she was given. Emily had accepted that reality long ago. She had stopped hoping for kindness from people who measured worth by power alone. But she had never stopped giving kindness to others. The morning after the gathering at Silverpine Manor, Emily returned to the small cottage she shared with Derek Whitmore on the edge of the Pack territory. The quiet house should have felt peaceful, but instead every corner reminded her of how alone she had become. The flowers she planted by the window were the only thing that still felt like hers. She touched the leaves gently, remembering a time when she believed a mate bond meant two people would protect each other. Derek had once been different. Years earlier, when they first discovered their connection, he had promised that she would never have to face the world alone. Emily believed him. She believed the future they imagined together would become real. But as Derek gained more influence among the pack, his kindness slowly disappeared. He began seeing her as a weakness instead of a partner. Her healing abilities were dismissed as insignificant. Her quiet nature was mistaken for helplessness. And every time she tried to remind him that she mattered, he reminded her that she was only an omega. Emily sat near the window as sunlight moved across the wooden floor. She wondered how long she had been trying to prove that she deserved basic respect. The answer hurt more than she expected. Too long. Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Derek entered the cottage with a confident expression, carrying the same cold distance he had shown the night before. "The guests at the manor are still talking," he said. Emily looked at him carefully. About what? Derek placed his coat aside and looked away. About how embarrassing it was that you drew attention. His words were calm, but they carried disappointment instead of concern. Emily felt a familiar heaviness in her chest. I did not try to embarrass you. That is the problem, Emily, Derek replied. You do not understand how the world works. She lowered her eyes, but this time something inside her refused to break. She had heard those words before. From strangers. From pack members. From the people who were supposed to stand beside her. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small voice reminded her that being gentle did not mean being worthless. Far away from the cottage, Adrian Blackthorne stood in the grand chamber of Silverpine Manor, listening to reports from his advisors. The Alpha King had spent years studying the actions of different packs, searching for leaders who protected their people, and those who abused their positions. Silverpine had caught his attention for one reason. Too many whispers surrounded Derek Whitmore. Too many stories about how certain voices were ignored. But Adrian was not interested in rumors. He wanted truth. And the truth had a face now. Emily Carter. The Omega who had been overlooked by everyone except the one person powerful enough to see her clearly. As Adrian looked through the records of Silverpine Pack, he found something unexpected. Emily had spent the last 3 years helping injured villagers recover, comforting frightened children, and supporting elderly members of the community. She had never asked for recognition. She had never demanded praise. She simply helped because it was who she was. For the first time in a long while, Adrian wondered if the strongest person in the room was not always the one standing at the front. Sometimes, true strength was the person who remained kind when the entire world gave them reasons not to. And Adrian knew he needed to learn more about the Omega everyone else had chosen to ignore. The morning mist settled over Silverpine territory as Emily Carter walked through the quiet village paths, carrying a small basket filled with herbs and healing supplies. To everyone around her, she was still the same forgotten Omega they had always known. The woman who stayed in the background. The woman who never demanded attention. The woman who smiled even when others gave her reasons not to. But Emily felt something changing inside herself. The words Adrian Blackthorne had spoken without revealing his identity remained in her thoughts. You should not have to apologize for existing. No one had ever said something like that to her before. Not Derek. Not the members of her pack. Not anyone who had known her for years. She wondered why a stranger's simple words had reached a part of her heart she had kept hidden for so long. Meanwhile, Adrian returned to the royal residence overlooking the northern territories. The stone halls were usually filled with discussions of treaties, alliances, and pack responsibilities, but his thoughts kept returning to Silverpine. His advisors noticed the change immediately. The Alpha King was known for his focus and discipline, yet today he seemed distracted by a single name. Emily Carter. The records show she has never caused conflict within her pack, one advisor explained. She has spent years helping others, but she receives no official recognition. Adrian looked through the documents carefully. Every page revealed the same truth. Emily had been overlooked not because she lacked value, but because those around her never bothered to see it. A pack that ignores kindness eventually forgets what leadership means, Adrian said quietly. Back in Silverpine, Emily arrived at the village healing center where several people were waiting. An elderly woman greeted her warmly. You always come when people need you, she said. Emily smiled softly. Everyone deserves someone who listens. The simple statement stayed with Adrian's guards later that afternoon when they visited the village under his orders. They reported everything they saw. They told him about the Omega who helped without expecting anything in return. They told him about the respect ordinary villagers had for her, even though the higher ranks of the pack ignored her. That evening, Derek returned from a meeting with other alphas. His expression was tense. He had noticed that people were beginning to speak differently about Emily. Not with pity, with respect. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. You have been talking to too many people lately, Derek said when he found her preparing herbs in the kitchen. Emily looked up calmly. I have only been helping the village. You need to remember your position, he replied. For years, those words would have made her shrink. But this time, Emily simply looked at him and asked, My position as what? Derek paused. The question was unexpected. Emily continued quietly. As someone who is less important than you? As someone who should stay silent so others can feel powerful? The room became still. Derek had no answer. Because for the first time, Emily was not arguing. She was not begging. She was simply standing in her own truth. That night, under the silver glow of the moon, Adrian stood alone outside the royal balcony, looking toward Silverpine territory in the distance. He had met countless leaders throughout his reign. Many were strong. Many were ambitious. But few possessed the quiet courage of the Omega who had nothing to prove and everything to give. He knew he could not ignore what he had witnessed. Something about Emily Carter had changed the way he saw strength itself. And soon, the entire pack would learn that the person they underestimated the most was the one they should have valued all along. The following days in Silverpine felt different, though most of the pack did not understand why. The same halls remained the same. Conversations filled the village, and the same people who once ignored Emily Carter continued pretending she was invisible. But something had shifted. Emily herself had changed. She no longer walked with her head lowered, hoping not to be noticed. She still carried the same gentle heart, but there was a quiet strength in the way she moved now, a confidence she had forgotten she possessed. Across the Northern Territories, Adrian Blackthorne continued his investigation into Silverpine Pack. He did not rush decisions. The Alpha King had learned that power without understanding could create more harm than good. Before judging a leader, he always searched for the truth hidden behind rumors and appearances. His journey had brought him to many places, but rarely had he met someone like Emily. She was not trying to gain influence. She was not seeking attention. She simply believed kindness mattered, even when the world rewarded cruelty instead. Adrian returned to Silverpine Manor disguised as a royal observer, choosing to remain among the guests rather than announce his presence. He wanted to see how people behaved when they believed no one important was watching. That evening, the pack gathered for a formal dinner. The room was filled with confident voices, expensive clothing, and conversations about status. Emily arrived quietly, carrying documents from the village healing center. She planned to leave them with the elders and return home without causing attention. But Derek Whitmore noticed her immediately. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice filled with irritation. Emily looked at him calmly. "I was invited to deliver the healing reports." Derek glanced at the papers in her hands and smiled without warmth. "You always seem to forget your place." A few people nearby looked away, pretending not to hear. Emily felt the familiar disappointment rise inside her, but she refused to let it control her. Before she could respond, an older village member stepped forward. "Those reports saved dozens of families this winter," the woman said. "Emily's work is the reason many of us are standing here today." The room became quiet. Derek looked uncomfortable because respect for Emily was growing and he could not control it anymore. From across the room, Adrian watched carefully. He saw the way Emily remained composed. He saw how she accepted praise with humility instead of pride. He saw how others were finally beginning to recognize what he had already understood. Strength was not always loud. Sometimes strength was the person who continued choosing compassion after being treated unfairly. Later that night, Emily stepped outside into the cool evening air. She looked up at the moon and allowed herself a moment of peace. She had spent so long believing she needed someone else to prove her worth. But slowly, she was learning that her value had existed all along. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned and saw the quiet stranger from the manor. Adrian stopped a respectful distance away, his expression calm. "You help people who never helped you," he said. Emily smiled faintly. "Someone has to." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. In that simple answer, he heard everything he needed to know. The woman standing before him was not weak. She was someone who carried light into places where others had allowed darkness to grow. And for the first time in years, Adrian wondered if destiny had placed him in Silverpine for a reason greater than duty. The quiet conversation beneath the moonlight stayed in Emily Carter's thoughts long after Adrian Blackthorne disappeared into the shadows of Silverpine Manor. She did not know his name. She did not know his rank. She only knew that for the first time in years, someone had looked at her as if she was more than an Omega who needed to stay silent. But the peace she felt that night did not last. The following evening, Silverpine Pack gathered once again for an important council dinner. Leaders from nearby territories had arrived, and every member of the pack wanted to appear strong, united, and respected. Emily attended because the village elders requested her presence. The healing report she prepared had helped many families, and they believed her voice deserved to be heard. Yet when she entered the grand hall, she immediately felt the familiar pressure of judgment surrounding her. Some looked surprised that she was invited. Others whispered that an Omega should not stand among leaders. Emily ignored the comments and quietly took her place. She had spent years allowing those voices to define her, but she was beginning to understand that their opinions did not decide her worth. Across the room, Adrian watched silently. He had returned because he wanted to see how Silverpine handled moments of truth. He wanted to know whether the pack could recognize the value of someone they had ignored for so long. Derek Whitmore stepped forward during the meeting, presenting himself as the confident leader everyone expected him to be. He spoke about strength, reputation, and the importance of protecting the pack's image. But when Emily's healing records were mentioned, his expression changed. "Those results are being exaggerated," Derek said. The room became quiet. Emily looked at him surprised. "The records are from the village center," she replied. "Every number has been confirmed." Derek shook his head. "You do not understand politics, Emily. You only see kindness. Leaders need more than that." The words were familiar, but they no longer had the same power over her. Before Emily could answer, an elderly council member stood. "Perhaps you are the one who does not understand," she said. "A leader who ignores the people who need help is not showing strength." Several others lowered their eyes, realizing the truth behind her words. Adrian remained silent, but his respect for Emily grew deeper. She could have responded with anger. She could have embarrassed Derek in front of everyone. Instead, she simply said, "I never wanted power. I only wanted to help people who were hurting." Her voice was calm, but the entire room heard her. Derek looked away, unable to challenge the sincerity behind her words. Later that night, as Emily walked through the quiet halls of the manor, she felt someone following behind her. She turned and saw Adrian standing there. This time there was something different in his expression. Not curiosity, not just respect. Something deeper. "Why do you continue helping people who refuse to see your value?" he asked. Emily looked toward the moonlit garden outside. "Because their inability to see it does not mean it is not there." Adrian stood silently, knowing those words would stay with him. For years he had searched for loyalty, courage, and true character among powerful wolves. Yet he had found them in the person everyone else overlooked. And soon, Silverpine would discover that the quiet Omega they dismissed was the one person who had captured the attention of the Alpha King. The morning after the council gathering, Silverpine Pack felt strangely quiet. The usual confidence that filled the halls had been replaced by uncertainty. Many members had witnessed something they could not easily explain. Emily Carter, the Omega they had spent years overlooking, had stood before the entire council and spoken with a calm strength that no one expected. She had not demanded respect. She had simply shown why she deserved it. But while some members of the pack began seeing Emily differently, Derek Whitmore struggled to accept the change. For years he had believed Emily's silence meant weakness. He believed she would always remain in the background, accepting whatever place others gave her. Now every conversation around the pack reminded him that people were starting to recognize her value. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Meanwhile, Adrian Blackthorne prepared to reveal the truth about his visit to Silverpine. He had gathered enough information to understand what was happening within the pack. He had seen how Emily was treated. He had seen how Derek used his position to make others feel small. More importantly, he had seen how Emily continued choosing kindness, even when kindness brought her nothing in return. Adrian had ruled the Northern Territories for many years, and he knew the difference between someone seeking attention and someone carrying genuine strength. Emily had never once tried to impress him. She did not even know who he was. That was what made her different. That evening, the pack gathered in the main hall for a final meeting before the Alpha King's departure. Derek stood before the crowd, expecting the usual respect. But this time whispers followed him instead of admiration. People were questioning the way he treated Emily. They were remembering the moments when she helped them while he ignored her efforts. Adrian entered the hall quietly, still dressed as the simple guest everyone believed him to be. Emily noticed him and offered a small smile. She still did not know why his presence made her feel calmer, but she trusted the quiet understanding in his eyes. Derek stepped forward and addressed the room. Before anyone judges this pack, they should remember that every leader must protect their reputation. His words were aimed at controlling the conversation, but Adrian finally spoke. A reputation built on ignoring the suffering of others is not worth protecting. The room fell silent. Derek turned toward him, confused by the confidence of the stranger who dared to challenge him. "And who are you to speak about leadership?" he asked. Adrian slowly removed the symbol hidden beneath his coat, revealing the mark recognized throughout the Northern Territories. The atmosphere changed instantly. Every voice disappeared. Every movement stopped. The man they thought was a simple visitor was the one person no one expected to find there. Adrian Blackthorne, the Alpha King, had been among them the entire time. Emily looked at him in disbelief. The stranger who listened when no one else did. The person who saw her when everyone looked away. Derek's expression changed as he realized every word he had spoken, every moment he had dismissed Emily, had been witnessed by the most powerful alpha in the land. Adrian looked across the hall, then toward Emily. His voice remained calm. The strength of a pack is not measured by how it treats the powerful. It is measured by how it treats those who have the least power. And in that moment, everyone understood that the quiet Omega standing in the room had never been the one who needed to prove her worth. They were the ones who had failed to recognize it. The revelation of Adrian Blackthorne's identity changed everything inside Silverpine Manor. The same people who once ignored Emily Carter now stood in complete silence, realizing the quiet stranger who listened to her pain was the Alpha King himself. Emily remained still, trying to understand how the person who treated her with the most respect was the one person everyone in the territory feared and admired. Adrian looked around the hall, not with anger but with disappointment. He had not come to Silverpine searching for conflict. He had come looking for the truth. And now the truth was standing before him. Derek Whitmore lowered his gaze, unable to hide his uneasiness. The confidence he carried moments before had disappeared. For the first time, he understood that his actions had been seen by someone who could not be influenced by his reputation. Adrian turned his attention toward the council members. "A title means nothing if it is used to silence others," he said calmly. "Leadership is not about being respected because people fear losing their place. It is about earning trust because people know they are protected." His words were not loud, yet every person in the room listened carefully. Emily watched him with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. She had spent years believing powerful people never noticed those like her. But Adrian had noticed everything. He had seen the moments when she stayed kind despite being dismissed. He had seen the patience she showed when others chose judgment. Derek finally spoke. "You do not know the entire situation." Adrian looked at him. "Then explain it." The simple request carried more weight than any accusation. Derek tried to explain that Emily was different, that Omegas were not meant to stand beside leaders, that every pack had traditions that needed to be respected. But the more he spoke, the clearer the truth became. His words were not about tradition. They were about control. Emily listened quietly, but this time she did not feel small. She realized something important. She had spent years trying to convince people that she deserved respect, but respect was never something she needed to beg for. It was something every person deserved from the beginning. Adrian noticed the change in her expression. The sadness that once followed her everywhere was slowly being replaced by confidence. After the meeting ended, Emily stepped outside into the garden behind the manor. The night air was calm, and the moonlight rested gently over the flowers she had always loved. Adrian followed a few moments later, keeping a respectful distance. "You handled yourself well," he said. Emily smiled softly. "I was not sure I did." "You spoke the truth without trying to hurt anyone," Adrian replied. "That requires more strength than many people possess." Emily looked at him carefully. "Why do you care?" It was the question she had been carrying since the night they first met. Adrian remained quiet for a moment. Then he answered honestly, Because I have spent years searching for people worthy of standing beside those they lead. I never expected to find one in someone everyone else had overlooked. Emily looked away, feeling emotion she did not fully understand. She had spent so long believing she was forgotten. Now, the Alpha King himself was telling her that she had always been seen. And somewhere beneath the moonlit sky of Silverpine, a bond neither of them expected was beginning to awaken. The morning sun rose over Silverpine territory, bringing a feeling that many members of the pack had never experienced before. For years, Emily Carter had walked through these lands feeling like a shadow. She had learned to accept quiet corners, lowered voices, and the belief that her kindness was something the world could easily ignore. But now everything looked different. Not because the world had changed overnight, but because Emily had finally started seeing herself differently. The garden behind Silverpine Manor became her place of peace. She often came there to care for the flowers and herbs that had grown with her over the years. To Emily, every plant carried a story. Some needed patience. Some needed protection. Some simply needed someone to believe they could bloom. Adrian Blackthorne watched her from a distance as he walked through the garden paths. The Alpha King had faced countless challenges throughout his reign. He had negotiated with powerful leaders, settled disagreements between territories, and carried responsibilities that few people understood. Yet standing there, watching Emily gently care for something others would overlook, he felt a different kind of respect. She reminded him that strength was not always found in victory or authority. Sometimes it existed in the choice to remain kind when kindness was difficult. "You always come here when you need time to think," Adrian said. Emily turned and smiled. "How did you know?" "Because people who carry a lot often search for quiet places," he answered. Emily looked at him thoughtfully. She was still adjusting to the truth about him. The man she thought was simply a quiet visitor was the ruler of the entire Northern Territories. Yet somehow, knowing his title did not change the way she saw him. What mattered was the person who had listened when no one else did. "I do not understand something," Emily said softly. "Everyone sees you as powerful. They respect you because of your position. But you notice someone like me." Adrian looked at the garden around them. "Power can make people look at you. It does not always make them understand you." His words stayed with her. For so long, Emily believed she needed to become stronger in the way others expected. She thought she needed to be louder, more confident, more like the alphas who surrounded her. But Adrian showed her something different. Her gentleness was not a weakness. It was the very thing that made her remarkable. Later that afternoon, an unexpected event brought the entire pack together. A group of villagers arrived at the manor carrying letters of appreciation for Emily. They spoke about the time she helped their families, supported their recovery, and offered comfort when they needed it most. Emily listened with surprise. She had never kept track of what she gave to others. She simply remembered the people who needed help. Adrian stood beside her, watching as the pack finally saw the truth he had recognized from the beginning. Emily Carter was not an Omega waiting to be saved. She was someone who had been saving others all along. As the crowd slowly departed, Emily looked toward Adrian. "I never thought anyone would remember those things." Adrian smiled slightly. The world often notices loud achievements first, but the quiet ones are the ones that change lives. Beneath the evening sky, Emily felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Not the fragile kind that depended on someone else choosing her, but the kind that came from knowing she had value all along. And Adrian knew that the connection forming between them was no longer just curiosity. It was something deeper, something written long before either of them understood it. The moon hung above Silverpine territory as the pack gathered for the most important ceremony of the season. For many years, Emily Carter had stood at the edge of these gatherings, watching others receive praise while she remained unnoticed. But tonight was different. The same people who once looked past her now waited to hear her name. Emily entered the grand hall beside Adrian Blackthorne, and the room fell into a respectful silence. She still found it difficult to understand how quickly her life had changed. Only weeks earlier, she believed she would spend forever proving that she deserved basic kindness. Now the Alpha King stood beside her, not because she was powerful in the way others expected, but because he saw the strength she had carried all along. Adrian looked across the gathered members of Silverpine Pack. His voice was calm but carried throughout the hall. A pack is not measured by the strength of its strongest members. It is measured by how it treats those who need understanding. The words reminded everyone of the mistakes they had made. They remembered the Omega they ignored. The woman who offered help without asking for recognition. The person who continued caring even when others failed to care for her. Derek Whitmore stood among the crowd, silent and uncomfortable. He had once believed Emily's kindness made her weak, but now he understood that kindness had been the very thing that made her unforgettable. Emily looked around the room and saw people who once avoided her now offering genuine respect. Yet she did not feel pride from their change in behavior. She felt relief. Relief that she no longer needed to hide who she was. After the ceremony, Emily walked outside into the garden where everything had started. The flowers she cared for moved gently in the evening breeze. Adrian joined her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. They simply enjoyed the quiet. "Do you ever regret being kind to people who did not deserve it?" Adrian asked. Emily smiled softly. "No. Their actions showed who they were. My choices showed who I was." Adrian looked at her with admiration. In all his years as Alpha King, he had met many people who wanted power. Many who wanted influence. Many who wanted to be remembered. But Emily was different. She never chased attention. She never asked the world to reward her. She simply lived according to the values she believed in. A gentle breeze passed through the garden, and Emily felt a strange warmth in her heart. She had spent so long believing she was waiting for someone else to choose her. But now she understood something important. She had always been worthy. She had always mattered. Adrian stood beside her beneath the moonlight, knowing the connection between them was something rare. Not a bond built on status or expectation, but one built on respect, trust, and understanding. Across Silverpine, the story of the forgotten Omega began to change. She was no longer remembered as the woman who was overlooked. She was remembered as the woman who reminded an entire pack that true strength could be gentle. And for the first time in many years, Emily Carter no longer wondered if she belonged. She finally knew she did.